Shana Tova, everyone. Hope you had a beautiful Rosh Hashanah. We just started a new year, and with starting a new year, there's a very famous custom on taking upon ourselves new good customs, new good deeds, new good commitments for this coming year. But how do you choose what commitments you're going to stand by, what you're going to pick? How are you going to actually be able to make them applicable to your life? There's a story of a student who goes to his rabbi and he says, "Look, Rabbi, I have picked 10 new commitments, good commitments for this next coming year, and hopefully this will help me have a good new year." The rabbi looks at him and says, "Beautiful. Remove 9 out of the remaining 1, cut that 1 in half, then you'll have a good new year." So the question is, what? Should we not dream big? What happens if we dream big? If we dream too big, we fail, we give up completely. And that's a very, very big problem. The problem is we think that what we're doing is being very generous. We're saying, I'll commit to all these things, and worst comes to worst, I won't be able to do all of them. But what ends up happening is we commit to more than we can handle. And this is what the Torah tells us, tafasta merubeh lo tafasta. Okay? If you try to grab a lot, if you try to hold on to a lot, it all ends up falling out of your hands. You end up with nothing. Therefore, try to pick goals that are attainable, goals that you can live with, goals that will work for you. This works also in marriage. If you get into a fight with your wife and then your commitment to your wife is, I promise to be the perfect husband, never fight again, never do anything to upset you, only ever say nice things, and everything will be perfect, then when inevitably you fail because we are human and we are incapable of being perfect, then everything shatters for you. But instead of that, you make a small attainable goal. So I see that what right now, something that caused this struggle was I'm not as available, I'm not helping as much, so I'm going to commit that for half an hour a day, I'm going to help with things around the house for a week, for a month, right? Something attainable. Hopefully it lasts longer than that. Hopefully it encourages you to do more than that. But it starts with small attainable goals. There is a midrash, part from the Gemara, that tells us something very, very scary. It tells us that when we get up to Shamayim, when we get up after 120 years, we stand up in front of God, and you're standing there with everything that you've accumulated throughout your life, and you stand there and say, look, I've learned Torah. And the Midrash says, and God asks you, my son, why did you not learn Mishnah? And then someone comes and he says, look, I learned Mishnah. And God says, my son, why did you not learn Gemara? And he says, and the next person comes and he says, I learned Gemara. And God says, my son, why did you not learn Halakha? And so on into the mystical realms of things. Now, this is something very scary. It means it's never good enough. But Rav Tzadok from Lublin comes and tells us something very, very important. He says the way we need to read it and understand it is, first of all, there's a key word that repeats itself in every single part of this. And it's my son, bni, my loved one. Could you have done a bit more? It is a father motivating his son and saying, could you have done? Just push yourself a little bit more. Try to reach a bit further, right? If we don't push ourselves, if we don't motivate ourselves, we're not going to get anywhere. So we need to push ourselves. And we say a little bit more. And another thing that he says is pay attention. They're not asking the person who learned Torah, why didn't you learn Gemara? Not skipping 2 steps, but rather skipping 1. And this is something very important that we learn actually from this week's parasha. This week's parasha, Parashat HaAzinu, says, Kirvivim alei esev, kisirim alei deshe v'chirvivim alei esev. Okay, like blades of grass and like strands of hair, tiny little steps. That's how we get places. That's how we make commitments. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. We grow by tiny little steps. It's not the big things. It's little tiny steps, one after the next. And in those steps of one after the next, hopefully we are able to actually stay in the place that we want to get to and build up from there. What happens if you try to jump and skip steps? You fall back, you miss, you go 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, right? But if you go 1 step at a time, 1 step, 1 step, 1 step, then you don't fall back as much. We've been saying this in these days between the first day of Elul and the end of Sukkot. We say a very special Mizmar Tehillim, and we say, Mi ya'aleh behar Hashem u'mi yakum bimkom kodsho. Who will go up to the palace of God, and who will stand in His presence? It's one thing to race to the top to get to the palace, but who gets to stay? Who actually makes it there? I grew up with my Abba always telling me, he said, we have a few different types of Satan, of this demon, this Yetzer Hara, this bad evil inclination that tries to trip us up. And he says, sometimes, we can tell that it's this evil inclination. The evil inclination is very clear to us when we want to do something that is so clearly bad, right? And then we say, oh, this is the evil inclination, I should fight this. But there's another type of evil inclination, one that pushes us from and back and tells us, go, run, run, run. Do everything today. Become an absolute tzaddik today. You don't keep kosher at all, tomorrow you are keeping the strictest level of kashrut. You haven't been keeping Shabbat, tomorrow you are keeping Shabbat completely with all of its limitations. You've never been into a synagogue before, now you are going to be praying 3 times a day, non-stop, and build it up like that. And he says what ends up happening is your evil inclination tries to push you and says, go do more than you can handle. And we need to remember this, like blades of grass and like strands of hair. Tiny little steps, step after step, what you're able to handle. You can do a bit more, you push yourself a bit more. That's how we will get from this year to having a better year. God willing, we should all have a Shabbat Shalom, a Gemar Chatima Tova, and a wonderful, wonderful year.